The document felt impossibly thin in Beatrice's hand, a single sheet of paper to erase a life. It was October of 1888, and the air in the small parlor of the house her father had built already held the blade of the coming winter. Elspeth Hayes, 18 years old, sat perfectly still on the horsehair sofa, her hands folded in her lap. She had buried her father, Thomas, 2 days prior. Beatrice, the woman he had married less than a year ago, had not waited for the ground to settle. "The will is quite clear, Elspeth," Beatrice said, her voice as crisp and bloodless as the paper she held. She was a woman from the East, all sharp angles and starched collars, who had never understood the granite and ponderosa landscape Thomas Hayes had loved. "The house and all property, including the mining claim on Widow's Peak, are left to me, his wife." Elspeth said nothing. She watched a dust mote drift through a slice of pale afternoon sun. Her father had been a geologist, a man who read stories in rock and time. He had been 54, strong as an ox, until a pocket of bad air in an exploratory shaft had taken him in less than 5 minutes. Beatrice continued, folding the paper with a sharp crease. "He made a provision for you, of course. A sum of $50 to be paid from the estate, and his personal effects, his books, his instruments, his journals, they are yours to keep." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Elspeth as if measuring a piece of furniture for removal. "The terms of the settlement require the property to be vacated. I need to settle the estate with the mining company. They've made an offer on the claim." Still, Elspeth was silent. Her composure was a fortress her stepmother could not breach. She had learned it from her father, who had taught her that the mountains did not reward hysterics. You met a blizzard with calculation, a rock slide with patience, a loss with the quiet work of carrying on. "You have until Saturday," Beatrice stated. It was Tuesday, 4 days. "That should be sufficient time to arrange your affairs and secure passage elsewhere." "Elsewhere?" Elspeth repeated, the word tasting of dust and distance. "Durango, perhaps," Beatrice offered, a suggestion devoid of any real concern. "Or Denver. A girl your age should be able to find work, a domestic position, I imagine." The cruelty of it was its precision, its administrative coldness. There was no shouting, no overt malice. There was only the will, the deed, and the calendar. The law, as Beatrice presented it, was as indifferent and absolute as gravity. Elspeth was not being thrown out. She was simply no longer entitled to be in. The house, the mountainside, the very air she breathed had been legally transferred. She was a line item in an accounting ledger, a small debt to be paid and dismissed. She thought of her father's hands, calloused and mapped with silver dust, the way he would hold a piece of quartz to the light and explain the eons of pressure that had formed it. He had built this house with his own labor, felling the timber, fitting the joints, raising the walls that now held the scent of another woman's lavender water. He would never have intended this. But he was dead, and the paper in Beatrice's hand spoke with more authority than his memory. Elspeth finally met her stepmother's gaze. Her own eyes were the color of a winter sky over granite, clear and unyielding. "I will be gone by Saturday," she said. Her voice was steady. She would not give Beatrice the satisfaction of a single tear. She would not beg or bargain. She would accept the terms as they were laid out, a problem to be solved, an equation with a missing variable. She stood, the interview clearly over. Beatrice remained seated, a small, triumphant queen on a throne of fresh grief. Elspeth walked from the parlor, her back straight, leaving the woman and her thin, powerful paper behind her. The cold had begun. She did not go to her room to weep. Instead, she went to the kitchen and sat at the heavy pine table her father had made from a single slab of ponderosa. The sun was setting, casting long, skeletal shadows of the aspen trees across the floor. She laid out the entirety of her worldly possessions on the worn wood. The $50 Beatrice had given her in crisp banknotes, a small silver locket containing a lock of her mother's hair, and the clothes she wore. The assessment was a brutal arithmetic. $50. She wrote the number on a scrap of paper. Then she began to list the costs. A stagecoach ticket to Durango, the nearest town of any size, was $12. That left $38. A room in a respectable boarding house, if one could be found, would be at least $1 a day, including meals. That gave her just over a month to find work. She was 18 years old. She was strong and healthy, but she had no training for the work available to women. She was not a teacher, a nurse, or a seamstress. The jobs were in laundries, kitchens, or as domestics. 14-hour days of hard labor for $10 a month, if she was lucky. And those jobs went to women who were known, who had family or a church to speak for them. She had no one. Her mother had died when she was a child, and her father's people were all gone or lost to the westward drift. She was alone at 9,500 feet, with winter coming on. The first snow had already dusted the high peaks. By November, the passes could be closed. By December, the temperature would drop to 20, then 30 below zero, and the snow would lie 6 feet deep on level ground. To be without shelter in these mountains in winter was a death sentence. She crossed out the stagecoach ticket. Fleeing was not an option. It was a $12 gamble on a future that did not exist. So, the town of redemption. Population 412. A mining settlement clinging to the side of a mountain. What could it offer? She could try to get a job at the saloon, serving drinks and cleaning floors. But the saloon was no place for a young woman alone. It was a place of last resort, and she was not there yet. She could ask for charity, but from whom? The miners' families had little enough for themselves. The company that ran the mine owned the town, and their charity extended only to their own payroll. She sat at the table as the room grew dark, the numbers on the page stark and unyielding. $50. 4 days. A winter that had killed men far stronger and better equipped than she. The logic was a tightening vice. Every path she considered ended in a wall of ice or starvation. The world had shrunk to this single room, this ticking clock. Beatrice had not just taken her home, she had taken her future, handing her an eviction notice from life itself. The cruelty was not in the act, but in its calm, calculated efficiency. She was being discarded. Yet, even as the cold reality settled into her bones, self-pity found no purchase. It was a useless emotion, her father had always said. It burned no fuel, built no shelter, and filled no empty stomach. Her mind, trained by his practical, geological patience, kept turning the problem over, looking for a fissure, a weakness, a different kind of solution. The town would not save her. The law would not save her. She had $50, the clothes on her back, and her father's personal effects, packed in a single wooden crate in the corner. It was from that crate that salvation would have to come. On her third day, with the house feeling more like a tomb with every passing hour, Elspeth finally opened the crate containing her father's things. The scent of pine resin, old leather, and pipe tobacco filled the air, a ghost of his presence that was both a comfort and a fresh wound. Inside were his worn tweed jacket, his collection of geological texts, his brass transit and compass, and at the very bottom, his field journal. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with his precise, angular handwriting, detailing 20 years of walking these mountains. It was less a diary than a scientific record, filled with topographical sketches, mineral assays, and notes on rock formations. She sat on the floor, turning the pages carefully. Here was a sketch of the vein of silver he was chasing on Widow's Peak. Here were his calculations on the stability of the main mine shaft. It was the work of his life. She ran her finger over the ink, remembering him at the kitchen table, mapping and measuring by the light of a kerosene lamp. He had taught her to read these maps, to understand the language of the land he wrote in. He believed knowledge was the only true inheritance. Her fingers stopped on an entry dated 2 years prior, in the late summer of 1886. The heading read, Devil's Chimney Formation, South Slope of Widow's Peak. Below it was a detailed sketch, a cross-section of a hillside. It showed a limestone cave, a deep, dry chamber hidden behind a narrow opening. Her father's notes were meticulous. Entrance faces due south, optimal for passive solar gain in winter months. Interior dimensions approximately 12 feet width by 20 feet depth, 8 feet ceiling. Floor is dry, well drained. Remarkable thermal mass in the surrounding limestone. Should hold daytime heat well into the night. Elspeth's breath caught. She remembered the place. He had taken her there once, on a survey trip. A hidden spot, the entrance screened by a thicket of mountain laurel and scrub oak. A place no one would find by accident. Her eyes scanned the rest of the notes. Most curious feature, he had written, is a secondary fissure at the rear of the main chamber. A natural flue, drawing air upwards. Provides excellent ventilation. A man could build a fire near the entrance, and the smoke would draw perfectly. A man could winter here, if he had to. He had even calculated the average winter temperature differential, estimating the cave could maintain a temperature 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the outside air, even without a fire, simply from the Earth's heat and the stored solar energy. Then she saw the final detail, a smaller sketch in the margin. It showed a narrow crawl space branching off from the main chamber, leading away into the rock. An arrow pointed to it with the annotation, Rear passage, opens out into Aspen Grove 100 yards west, a back door. The journal lay open in her lap, a map not to gold or silver, but to survival. This was her father's true legacy, not the $50, not the house he had lost to a stranger's signature. It was this, knowledge meticulously recorded. He had, without knowing it, prepared her for this exact moment. He had left her a key. The bleak assessment of the night before, the stark and unforgiving mathematics of her situation, suddenly had a new variable. The equation was no longer impossible. A quiet, fierce hope began to kindle in her chest, a low, steady flame. She was not alone. Her father was still with her, his voice reaching across death through the ink on this page. He had given her a place. Now she had to see if she had the strength to claim it. The next morning, an hour before dawn, Elspeth shouldered a small pack containing a loaf of bread, a canteen of water, her father's compass, and the journal. She left the house without a backward glance, the air sharp and cold against her face. She followed the route from her memory, cross-referenced with the map in the journal, heading up the familiar trail toward Widow's Peak. The climb was steep, nearly 2,000 feet of elevation gain from the town. The sun rose as she cleared the tree line, illuminating the vast, silent expanse of the San Juans. The aspen groves were a blaze of gold, a final, defiant beauty before the monochrome of winter. She pushed past fallen timber and through dense stands of ponderosa pine, the ground thick with a carpet of needles. Her father had taught her to walk in the mountains, to pace herself, to read the signs of the land. After 2 hours of steady climbing, she reached the south-facing slope he had described. It was a steep wall of weathered gray limestone, catching the full force of the morning sun. Just as the journal noted, a dense thicket of mountain laurel grew at its base. Pushing through the tough, leathery leaves, she found it. A dark, vertical slit in the rock, no more than 4 feet wide and 7 feet high, almost perfectly concealed. Stepping inside was like entering another world. The air was still and cool, but not damp. It smelled of dry earth and stone. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, the chamber opened up before her, exactly as her father had drawn it. The ceiling was a solid vault of rock 8 feet above her head. The floor was a smooth, packed earth, sloping gently downward from the entrance, ensuring any moisture would run out. Not in. The space was long and narrow, a natural room carved by ancient water. She walked to the back, her footsteps echoing slightly in the profound silence. She ran her hand along the limestone wall. It felt cool but not cold, radiating a subtle, stored energy. This was the thermal mass her father had written about. The rock was a battery, absorbing the sun's heat by day and releasing it slowly through the night. She found the natural flue, a fissure running up the rock face near the entrance, a perfect chimney. And in the deepest recess of the cave, hidden behind a knob of rock, was the crawl space. She got on her hands and knees, the small opening just wide enough for her shoulders. After a tight squeeze of about 10 feet, the passage widened, and she could see a faint light ahead. 100 yards later, just as he'd written, she emerged into a dense grove of young aspens, the white trunks standing like sentinels. A hidden back door. She returned to the main chamber and stood in the center, taking it all in. This was not a desperate shelter. It was a defensible, brilliantly situated dwelling. It had heat, ventilation, drainage, and 2 exits. It was a fortress. Her father, the geologist, had not just seen a cave. He had seen a system, an engine for survival. Standing there, in the quiet, sun-warmed dark, Elspeth felt the last of her fear fall away, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. This could work. This could actually work. She had a place. Now she had to provision it. The $50 in her pocket was no longer a pittance to flee with. It was the seed capital for a new life. She walked back to Redemption, her stride purposeful. Her destination was Croft's General Mercantile, the largest and oldest store in town. Silas Croft, the proprietor, was a man in his 60s with a quiet manner and eyes that had seen more than one boom and bust. He had known her father for 20 years and respected him. He was leaning on the counter, reading a newspaper when she entered. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I was sorry to hear about your father. A good man." "Thank you, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice steady. "I need to purchase some supplies." She handed him a list she had composed on the walk down, a document of meticulous calculation. Every item was essential, every dollar accounted for. He put on his spectacles and read it aloud, his brow furrowed in thought. "A good shovel, that'll be $3.50. A pickaxe, $3. A quality handsaw, $2. A single-bit axe, $2.75. 10 pounds of flour, $2. 5 pounds of beans, $1. A slab of salt pork, $1.50. Lard, salt, coffee, matches, a box of 20-gauge shells, 3 iron pots, a whetstone. He looked up at her over the rim of his glasses, his expression unreadable. Her list was not the list of a young woman leaving town. It was the list of someone digging in. "That's a heavy load for a young woman," he said, his tone neutral. "I can manage it," she replied simply. He said nothing more but began to gather the items from the crowded shelves. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy, pulling down sacks and boxes, weighing out beans and flour on the brass scale. As he worked, he added things that were not on her list. A heavy wool blanket, slightly moth-eaten but still warm. A large, waterproofed canvas tarp, folded neatly. A box of 50 extra shells for the shotgun her father had left her. A small keg of nails, a length of good rope. She watched him, her heart pounding. "Mr. Croft, I can't afford—" He cut her off, not unkindly. "Your father kept an account here for 20 years, never late with a payment. His credit is still good in this store." He finished stacking the items on the counter. The pile was formidable. "That will be $46.20, he said, tallying only the items from her original list. He was giving her the rest. It was a quiet act of rebellion, a vote of confidence from the one person in town who mattered. He knew what Beatrice was doing, and he was choosing a side. He helped her load the supplies into 2 large burlap sacks. "I have an old freight sled in the back," he said. "The runners are sound. You can use it to haul this gear. Bring it back when you're settled." He did not ask where she was going. He did not need to. He saw the set of her jaw, the grim determination in her eyes, and he understood. He was her first and only ally, offering practical help without questions or pity. As she dragged the loaded sled out of the store and up the trail toward Widow's Peak, the $3.80 left in her pocket felt like a fortune. She had tools, food, and shelter. The rest would come from labor. The real work was about to begin. The construction phase was a testament to methodical, grinding effort. Elspeth divided her life into tasks, measured in daylight and calories burned. The first week was dedicated to stone. The cave entrance, while narrow, was still a wide open door to the winter wind. Using the pickaxe and shovel, she cleared the ground in front of it down to the bedrock, creating a level foundation. Then, she began gathering stones from the surrounding scree slope, flat, angular pieces of limestone that had broken from the cliff face over centuries. She hauled them one by one on the freight sled, her muscles screaming in protest. She dry-stacked them with painstaking care, fitting them together like a puzzle, creating a low wall 3 feet thick and 4 feet high that spanned the width of the entrance. She left a 2-foot gap for a door and a small square opening for a window. The work was slow and brutal, but with each stone she laid, the cave felt less like a hole in the rock and more like a home. The second week was for wood. Her father's journal had contained a rough calculation. A shelter of this size, in a winter of this severity, would require at least 3 cords of seasoned firewood. A cord was a stack 4 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long. It was a mountain of wood. She found a stand of deadfall pine about a 1/4 mile from the cave. For 10 hours a day, the mountainside echoed with the rhythmic bite of her axe and the rasp of her handsaw. She felled the dead trees, sawed them into manageable lengths, split them with the axe, and hauled them back to the cave on the sled. She stacked the wood inside, along the entire length of one wall, organizing it by size: tinder, kindling, and larger logs for overnight burning. The growing woodpile was a visible measure of her security, a bulwark against the coming cold. During the third week, she focused on the interior. She used the rope and canvas tarp from Mr. Croft to create a heavy, insulated door flap that could be secured from the inside. She framed the small window opening with scavenged wood and lacking glass, planned to cover it with a piece of stretched, greased canvas that would let in some light while keeping out the wind. Her most ambitious project was the stove. Using the flattest stones she could find and a mortar made from clay, she dug from a nearby stream bed. She built a small, efficient stove against the rock wall, directly beneath the natural chimney. It was a simple design, a firebox with a flat top for cooking, carefully sealed to prevent smoke from leaking into the cave. When she lit the first fire, the draft caught immediately, pulling the smoke straight up the fissure and out into the open air. The design worked. Heat began to radiate from the stones, a steady, life-giving warmth that pushed back the deep, permanent chill of the rock. She built a raised sleeping platform out of pine boughs and smaller logs, getting her bed off the cold ground, and fashioned shelves for her supplies from scrap wood. By the end of the month, as the first serious snow began to fall, her shelter was complete. It was a marvel of applied engineering, built from scavenged materials, her father's knowledge, and her own relentless labor. The first great test came in the second week of November. A blizzard swept down from the north, a wall of white that erased the world. The temperature plummeted, settling at 20 degrees below zero and holding there for 5 straight days. The wind howled over the ridge, but inside the devil's chimney, there was only the quiet crackle of the fire and the low hiss of the draft in the chimney. The snow piled up against her stone wall, burying the entrance completely. Elspeth had to dig a tunnel just to get outside for more firewood from the portion of her woodpile she'd strategically stacked near the entrance. The snow, however, was not an enemy. It was a partner. The deep drift acted as a layer of insulation, its trapped air pockets sealing her in, further protecting her from the wind and cold. Her days settled into a disciplined routine. She would wake before dawn, add wood to the stove, and melt snow for coffee and oatmeal. She kept meticulous records in the margins of her father's journal, just as he would have done. She noted the outside temperature, the inside temperature, which she kept at a steady 50 degrees, and her rate of fuel consumption. She calculated that she was burning approximately 1/8 of a cord per week, a rate that would see her through to April with wood to spare. Her engineering had been sound. The thermal mass of the limestone absorbed the stove's heat, and the rock walls radiated a gentle warmth long after the fire had banked to embers. The south-facing entrance, even with its small window covered, gathered what little light and warmth the low winter sun offered. On the third night of the storm, she was jolted awake by a sound, shouting, faint and distorted by the wind and snow. She crept to the door flap and listened. 2 men on horseback, their voices sharp with frustration. "Nothing here!" one yelled. "The snow's covered everything. If she was up here, she's buried or frozen by now. Let's get back before we freeze, too." It was the voice of one of Beatrice's hired hands from the mine. Her stepmother had sent someone to confirm her demise. They were no more than 30 feet from her entrance, but they saw nothing but a snow-covered rock face. They turned their horses and rode away. Elspeth leaned against the stone wall, her heart hammering. The hidden cave, now buried in a blanketing of snow, had saved her. They would report back to Beatrice that the inconvenient stepdaughter was gone, a problem solved by the indifference of the mountain. She was presumed dead. She was free. A ghost on the mountain, she was finally, completely safe. As the winter deepened, word began to trickle back to redemption. A trapper, checking his lines high on Widow's Peak, saw a thin plume of smoke rising from what he'd always thought was just a rockfall. He told the story at the saloon. Silas Croft heard it and knew at once. One bitter afternoon in January, Elspeth heard a crunching of snowshoes outside her tunnel. She grabbed the shotgun, her heart pounding, but the voice that called out was familiar. "Miss Hayes? It's Silas Croft. I brought you some coffee." He was a welcome sight. He marveled at what she had built, his quiet eyes taking in the stacked firewood, the stone stove, the neat shelves. "Your father would be proud," he said, and it was the highest praise she could imagine. He brought news of the town and of Beatrice, who had sold the mining claim to a Denver consortium for a paltry $500, convinced it was worthless. Mr. Croft's visit was the first of several. He became her link to the outside world. And then, others began to come. The first was Mrs. Gable, a miner's widow whose cabin was drafty and whose woodpile had frozen solid. She had 2 young children who were always cold. She'd heard the stories of the girl in the cave who knew how to stay warm. Hesitantly, she asked for help. Elspeth did not gloat or hoard her knowledge. She took a sled down to Mrs. Gable's cabin and spent a day showing her how to chink the walls with mud and moss. She drew a diagram in the dirt, explaining how to build a small, efficient stone heat reflector behind her existing iron stove, maximizing its output and cutting her wood consumption by half. She gave the woman 1/4 of a cord of her own split, dry pine, refusing any payment. Soon, others followed. The O'Malley family, whose newborn was sick with a cough in their cold shack. A group of 3 young miners, new to the territory, who were burning through green wood and filling their cabin with smoke. Elspeth became an unlikely consultant on the physics of survival. She taught them what her father had taught her: the importance of dry, seasoned wood, the principles of draft and ventilation, the insulating properties of snow. She never went to them. They came to her, climbing the slope to the Devil's Chimney as if on a pilgrimage. They came seeking knowledge, and she gave it freely. The young woman who had been cast out as a worthless burden was becoming the person the community turned to when the cold pressed in. Her vindication was not happening in a courtroom or a bank. It was happening here, on the mountain. 1 cord of wood, 1 well-built stove, 1 warm child at a time. In early March, as the first signs of a thaw began to appear, a new visitor arrived at the Devil's Chimney. He was a man named Julian Cole, an engineer from the Denver Mining Company that had purchased her father's claim. He was in his late 20s, dressed in practical, high-quality winter gear, and he had an air of quiet competence that reminded her of her father. He had been sent to properly survey the claim Beatrice had sold them and had heard the town's fantastical stories about her. He had come to see for himself. He did not treat her as a curiosity. He examined her shelter with the trained eye of a professional. He walked the perimeter, tapping the dry stacked wall, running his hand over the clay mortar of her stove, and sighting up the natural flue. He asked precise questions about her fuel consumption, the average interior temperature, and the construction timeline. "This is a remarkable application of passive solar principles and thermal retention," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Your stove design, it's a modified Russian furnace, incredibly efficient. Where did you learn to build like this?" "My father," Elspeth said simply. "He was a geologist. He taught me how things work." Cole's interest sharpened. "Thomas Hayes was your father? We have his name on the initial claim documents." He paused. "The company is underwhelmed with the purchase." The preliminary assays are poor. We believe Mrs. Hayes may have misrepresented the claim's potential. Elspeth felt a cold stillness settle over her. She made a decision. She went to the wooden crate where she kept her father's things and retrieved the journal. She opened it to the pages detailing his survey of the claim on Widow's Peak. The pages were filled with his meticulous drawings of the rock strata, his assay results from core samples he'd taken himself, and his calculations. They pointed not to the superficial surface deposits the company had found, but to a deep, rich vein of silver-lead ore, a lode worth a fortune. Julian Cole read the journal entries, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to astonishment. "My God," he breathed, tracing a diagram with his finger. "This isn't prospecting. This is science. His analysis is flawless. The main lode isn't where we've been looking. It's deeper, following this fault line." He looked from the journal to Elspeth, a new understanding in his eyes. Beatrice Hayes sold this for $500. She had access to this journal. "It was in his desk," Elspeth said. She knew what he believed was there. The expert's recognition was not what gave her work or her father's legacy its value. She had already proven that through her own survival. But his professional validation was the key that would unlock a different kind of justice. He saw not a desperate girl in a cave, but a woman of immense competence and the rightful heir to a significant scientific discovery. He closed the journal gently. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice firm, "I believe the Denver office needs to see this. This is evidence, not just of a geological find, but of fraud." The reckoning, when it came, was as quiet and administrative as the initial cruelty. Julian Cole's report to the board of the North Star Mining Consortium in Denver was a masterpiece of engineering prose. It detailed, with charts and figures, the scientific validity of Thomas Hayes's surveys and the immense projected value of the silver lode. It also formally noted the fraudulent nature of the sale, citing the vast discrepancy between the purchase price and the asset's true value, which the seller, Beatrice Hayes, had clear reason to know from her late husband's papers. Faced with a clear-cut case of fraud and the prospect of a massive lawsuit, the company acted swiftly. The $500 sale was voided. The claim, by law, reverted to the estate of Thomas Hayes, and since Elspeth was his only living child, the claim was now hers. A lawyer from the company arrived in redemption with a new offer. Not to buy the claim, but to lease the mining rights from her, offering a $10,000 signing payment and a 5% royalty on all ore extracted. The news shattered Beatrice's world. Her small fortune was gone. The town sheriff, who had so readily notarized the will and deed for her, came under investigation by a federal marshal for his role in the affair. Stripped of her money and status, Beatrice became a pariah. In a final desperate act, she became convinced the journal was the source of her ruin. During a late spring blizzard, she rode up to Widow's Peak, intending to confront Elspeth and destroy the book. She became lost in the whiteout, her horse wandering off, and collapsed in the snow, less than 200 yards from the cave. It was Elspeth who found her. Checking her snare lines via the hidden back exit, she stumbled upon the half-frozen form of her stepmother. For a long moment, she looked down at the woman who had cast her out to die. Then, with a quiet sigh, she hoisted Beatrice onto her shoulders and carried her back to the cave, saving her life in the warmth of the shelter she had tried to deny her. It was the second time the cave had saved someone that winter. This act was not forgiveness. It was simply what one did. The mountain demanded it. Elspeth accepted the company's offer. She used the first payment to buy back her father's house, and the small parcel of land it stood on. She hired Mrs. Gable to help her keep it. She established a fund, administered by Silas Croft, to provide firewood and winter supplies for any family in Redemption who needed it. She never celebrated her victory over Beatrice. The cost was too high. Her father was still dead. The months of solitude and grinding labor were gone forever. The scars on her hands from the axe and the stone remained. The script of her life had been rewritten. She had not been rescued. She had rescued herself. And though she now lived in the warm, comfortable house her father had built, she never abandoned the Devil's Chimney. Every autumn, she would spend a week there, restocking the woodpile, checking the stone walls, and ensuring it was ready. The shelter remained hers, kept in a state of constant readiness. It was a testament to what she had endured and what she had become. Someone who had faced the cold, the cruelty, and the calculation, and had met them all with her own.